Hello and welcome to our expert discussion, How AI is Changing the Dynamics of Fintech. Our guest today is Lizzie Chapman, the CEO and co-founder of Zest Money. Zest is the largest and fastest growing fintech consumer company in India, and it serves 300 million potential customers whose lives can be changed by access to consumer credit. I'm Stuart Creek. I'm a marketing manager here at Simplilearn, and I will start off by sharing with you how to interact with us during this webinar. The Q&A button will allow you to put in questions for Lizzie to address toward the end of the session in the Q&A. Do ask all panelists and remember to hit send. Similarly, the chat window lets you send messages to us. Make sure that you put in all panelists or host and presenter so that we do get to see that message. Otherwise, if it comes privately to host, might not see it. Again, hit send for us to see that message. And we will also be doing some polls during this webinar. That is, if I can launch one. Our first poll is a pretty simple one. It's just two questions. What is your current job or job role, and how are you feeling today? Let me open that poll. I'll give you about a minute. We aren't going to spend 5 minutes on this poll. So we wanted to ask a question we've been asking since the pandemic started, which is, how are you feeling today? Not medically, but how are you coping with the changes around you? And I'll leave the poll open for just a few more seconds. You have about 15 seconds to get your answers in. And we have some managers, executives, and students today. Not that many people currently in fintech related jobs. The one thing I am glad to see is that pretty much everybody is thumbs up, or at least in the middle. So that's good to see. And I'm going to introduce Lizzie Chapman, who, as I mentioned, is the CEO and co-founder of Zest Money, which is the largest and fastest growing consumer lending fintech company in India. She is formerly the executive director of Digibank and a co-founder of Abode Bombay, and in past was country head of Wonga.com. So she has a sterling track record. So welcome, Lizzie.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm shocked to see that there's only 5% fintech participation. Hopefully, if we ran that poll again tomorrow, people will have switched. We can convert some people today on the call.
Precisely. So let me start off with a question. What's been the biggest trigger for fintech like Zest Money to power through this pandemic and survive? It's one of the most challenging times for business not only in India but around the world, and certainly for the financial services industry. So, what worked for you?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I guess the topic on everyone's lips at the moment. And it's been a very bizarre time. In some ways, it was the most challenging experience we've ever had, and something we never imagined we would live through. We had one of the most severe lockdowns in the world in India, and we had the double whammy of a lending business with a moratorium announcement from the regulator, which makes life very difficult. Um, but then there was this phenomenal kind of resurgence over the last few months and a huge shift towards all things digital around the world, and especially in our market, and really an acceleration of what we always expected would happen in the financial services industry, which is that really sharp move towards complete automation and digitalization. So what helped us? What helped us get through that difficult time and get to the light at the end of the tunnel? I think was probably two main factors. One is our customer centricity. We always put the customer first, and that meant it was very easy to make decisions when times were tough. So, for example, when the moratorium was announced, we didn't have to do any analysis. We knew that we would offer it to our customers, and all we had to do was think about what was the best way to communicate and educate them, for example. And because we had a great relationship with our customers already, they actually were very cooperative, very open to discussing any financial problems they were having. And we managed to sail through on the kind of risk and collection side really smoothly. I think the second factor, though, that really helped us, and hopefully why we're all here today, is that we are a completely data-centric organization. So everything we do revolves around data. And in difficult times, there can be no better way to make decisions quickly. Every decision counts, and speed of decision making is everything. And so we were really fortunate to have a phenomenal data set to be able to do things like, I'll give you just one simple example that hopefully people can relate to. When the lockdowns first hit, and none of us had any idea how severe this pandemic would be, one thing we needed to do was predict which of our customer segments would have the most challenge in keeping up their repayments, right? Because that's obviously one of the biggest risks to our business, and see how we could help them. But when there was no information about the pandemic, about the potential economic impact, etc., we had to create our own income shock prediction model. So a predictive algorithm that could look on an individual customer basis and ascribe a probability to how much their income would decline over the next 6 months. And we built that model very quickly. We deployed it, and it proved to be extremely accurate. And the brilliant thing about being an AI-driven business, we're really an AI-first business, is we were ready with models like that. We already had a team that were building them, and we could develop that model as we went along. So as we got more inputs, as we got more data, as we got information about hotspots, for example, literally to the PIN code level, this data could teach the model, and it would almost become self-learning. So over time, even the accuracy of our decisions was improving as we were getting more data back into the system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it certainly makes sense. I mean, it's one of the fantastic things about AI and machine learning is the more data you have, the better the model becomes.
Exactly.
So you have a business model that's fully automated.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And that's another thing that obviously helped at this time. So if you think about when the moratorium was first announced, a lot of traditional lenders had to basically, tell their branch manager, tell their frontline staff what would be the policy. Because we had a completely automated platform, we could immediately update all of our communications, our app, our website, almost in a matter of minutes with our policy. And we could use technology to create the smoothest and easiest ways for customers to either pause their loan or keep up their repayments during that difficult time. We also don't believe in cash. We've never handled cash in our business. And we used to get a lot of pushback from that in the early days. People would say, how can you operate in India and not handle cash? But we felt that it was synonymous with being a completely automated business. We really wanted to do end-to-end automation. And so during the pandemic, we just doubled down on our automated repayment mechanisms. We now offer about 15 different types of ways for people to pay. And we've done some great deals with people like Google Pay and all the big kind of UPI apps to give our customers, for example, cash back when they make their repayments. So it's not just that cash is awkward and difficult and takes time to collect. Digital payments are also better for the customer. You actually get an economic incentive to switch to them. So yeah, I think that kind of obsession with complete automation really, really came into play during that period. And we actually had, friends, people in the ecosystem, particularly at traditional banks, reaching out saying, can you tell us how you're collecting? Can you tell us how you're still servicing your customers? What is this wizardry that you guys are doing? But it's actually what we had always been doing, but it just became more relevant during that period. Yeah.
That kind of segues to another poll that I will launch here, because you talked about the centricity of AI in your business. So I'm going to ask folks if they think their future career will involve AI. So again, we'll just keep this open for about a minute and a half. But I know that we have few people in fintech now, but whatever industry you're in, what do you think your career holds with relation to AI? Do you think it's going to impact your career? Do you think it's something that you're going to need to understand and manage? Jan? Give about 20 more seconds. Do remember to hit submit. And the poll will close in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Just love that countdown.
Yay! Correct answer. That's good. I don't know where the other 33% were.
That's pretty decisive, I should say.
I guess, yeah, you could say we are preaching to the converted today. Nobody is going to be on this webinar if they don't understand that. So this is great. I'm so pleased to see that result because that was definitely a strong message I wanted to leave people with, which is that no matter what role you are in right now or what role you would like to be in, I can guarantee you it will involve AI in the next decade. Pretty much every piece of the world of work will touch AI in some way. I'm quite convinced of that. So it sounds like folks on the line already know that, and that's why they're here.
So dovetailing with your exhortation for people to consider AI, fintech as a career. So,
yeah.
In the specific case of AI and fintech, do you have a couple of examples or use cases of how AI powers it?
Yes, I'd love to talk about that. I think when we talk about AI, it's such a buzzword. It's everybody kind of throws around ML, AI, without actually relating it to the real world and how it touches you and me every day. Or if they do relate it, they give the classic example of, you buy a kettle on Amazon and the next day they show you an ad for a kettle, right? And people say, how is this AI? This is ridiculous. Luckily, things have advanced a lot. And in fintech, there are so many applications. And we have a central AI strategy team because everybody in the entire organization is imbibing an AI solution to the problems that they're facing. And this strategy team, I think, have some 85 different projects on their roadmap, right? Which touch every part of the business and the organization. The obvious one that fintech people always assume where AI comes in is in credit risk, right? Credit risk and underwriting. So I'm sure we've all been hearing for the last few years about the concept of using alternative data to assess credit risk, and the fact that traditional lenders will look only at things like, income statements, income proof, or, very traditional kind of paper-based data metrics. Of course, AI is critical in credit risk assessment. And from day zero, that was the absolute fundamental pillar of everything. About 13 different credit risk models run on a single transaction. And sometimes I explain it to people who aren't really completely comfortable with this concept of using AI and alternative data. They think there's a black box that we don't really understand, and it's like the computer says yes. That's not true. The way I sometimes try and explain it is, imagine a binomial tree that just gets more and more and more complex the more data you add. If you had a human making a credit decision on the basis of that tree, they could only remember so many nodes, right? After maybe 12 or 14, their head would, explode. We can create a tree with some 10,000 data points that can all interact and counterbalance each other, which absolutely leads to a more accurate and less biased credit decision. So that's one of the really powerful things about using AI models in credit risk. The other thing that's amazing is it's very fast. So if you look again at what happened during the pandemic, we didn't have to go back to our, manual underwriting team, change their rules, change their training, change their policies, because that takes a long time, right? You'd have to have a credit risk committee to make some decisions. The great thing by using AI models is you can very, very quickly retrain them, right? So you can give them new inputs, new course correction, and the models learn really, really fast. And one of the things that's very relevant to our product and to anybody that does consumer credit or credit cards or any products like that is something called dynamic line management. So basically saying, in January, we wanted to lend you $100 or 6,000 rupees. But guess what? Between January and October, your income has come down by 50%. So actually, we probably only want you to have $50 right now. So how quickly you can update that credit line is a very, very critical thing to reducing risk and actually making sure your product is suitable for your customer at all times. And again, with AI models, that can be dynamic. It can literally be real time. As soon as we get some information, we can adjust the credit line up and down. So that's just one example, but I wanted to give a couple more because I think otherwise people think that that's all AI is. It's just these black box models. A really cool way we use AI in our business is in fraud detection. And actually, more than 2 years ago, we bought a company who had been working on apps for Instagram to let you, pick your favorite photo from a bunch of photos, like which picture looks most like you, okay? And then you can post that on Instagram. And we saw that technology and we thought, that could be useful. And so we bought that company and we incorporated the AI technology they were using to build a face matching algorithm. So now we can look at a selfie of a customer and we can look at an ID document and we can very clearly identify if that is the actual identity. So that's a really small example where sometimes a model and a machine can be more accurate than a human being, right? Because we all have subjective biases. We all know that sometimes we get people mistaken. And then maybe just the final example I'll give you is a very boring one, but very, very relevant in anyone that does a lending business, which is the world of collections. And I say boring because people traditionally thought it was just all about, someone knocking on the door and collecting cash. As I've said already, in our business, we were never going to do that. So again, from day one, we had to create a far more automated and AI-driven approach to collections. And we have done that, and we're so proud of what we've done there. We think that we have one of the most interesting collection strategies. To put it very simply, our models can predict what time of day you would be most likely to, say, open an email or answer a phone call. And we will only show you messages at that time of day, not, for example, when you're like picking your kid up from school and you would be very harassed to see that message. We would do it at the time when we know you are receptive. That's just one example. But also, as you'll know, in India, we have a lot of complexity geographically. We have customers who speak more than 20 languages. Right. And so another incredible thing our model can do is match the right collections agent to the right customer, because the outcome of a call is going to be that much better if the right agent is speaking the right language to the right customer. So that's just a really simple example. But I hope that people can see that these are some of the applications of AI in fintech that can make a digital model so much more effective and frankly, consumer focused, right? Customer friendly than the more traditional manual ways of doing these things.
Which is somewhat ironic because we've been conditioned to think that processes conducted by machines are less personal, less friendly, and you're describing the opposite.
Absolutely. So, I love that you said that. No, I think you're right. And I think that we believe strongly in always using AI in a very ethical and customer first way. And it really can be, one of the most powerful things we can do is genuinely know our customer through data. And therefore we can give them a much, much better experience and make them feel more, special, frankly, than if we just had a one size fits all. So absolutely, completely agree.
So I'm going to ask the audience another poll question because I want to see what their opinion is compared to yours. And this poll is, what do you think, what tech trend will be the biggest disruptor coming in the coming years? So, well, again, leave this open, maybe just a tiny bit longer for people to consider. I believe this is a forced choice question where you can pick one. Which really makes you think about what your biggest impression is of the coming disruption in the industry. And we'll close the poll in about 20 seconds. About 10. Please hit enter. 3, 2, 1. And here's the poll result. So the primary answer from people who answered.
Interesting.
Rising demand for ethical AI. And trusted data. So a concern for the how the machines will interact with us and whether we can rely on them to be fair and discreet.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting and not completely surprising, especially with everything that's going on in politics and social media. So I hope that I can convince today that there is some incredibly powerful and positive benefits of AI. But you're right. Yeah, I think this is a hot topic. It's something we talk about a lot, which is this concept of ethical AI. One of the things that we feel passionately about at ZestMoney is customer data belongs only to the customer, right? It's your data, you own it. And we actually take great offense to companies that kind of boost their valuation and brand themselves as owning lots of data, because often that data doesn't belong to them, right? It actually belongs to their consumers. And we believe that if we are going to use a customer's data, they must consent to entrust us with it, with a very strong consent architecture. And secondly, maybe more importantly, that they understand that they're getting a benefit. We must never leave it opaque or non-transparent as to why we need that data. So we try and make it very clear, and we don't do some of the things that fintech companies in other markets do, and even in India, such as scraping your mobile phone and taking all your contact information, for example, right? We don't need to know your best friend's mobile phone number. That's not going to help us, I'm afraid. And I know why maybe some fintechs think they do need to know that, but we believe that the potential cost to you of giving us that data is not substantiated by the benefit, right? So data and how we use data always has to be on the basis of a cost benefit analysis and a conversation, a real dialogue with the customer. So actually, I saw this gamification as well in one of the answers, and that's something that a lot of fintechs are moving towards, which is almost a sort of trading system, saying, if you give me, this base level of data, I can give you this much of my service. If you want to add on this additional piece of data, then I can give you this much of my service. So it's a sort of trade, which is almost, gamified. But that falls under the remit, I would say, of ethical AI, right? Thinking about how do you create systems and data sets that are for the benefit of the customer, not to in any way exploit. But I'm really pleased to see that that's what people are talking about and see as the key concern, and something that probably as an industry, players like us need to be much more vocal about and reassure consumers that we are thinking properly about the ethics of AI. I think where it gets more complicated, and one of the other attacks on AI, but really important for everybody on this webinar, is to what extent does AI and I think that's also the subliminal fear that we all have. And that's typical of any new technology, right? I think, for history, whenever something new comes in, there's this fear that, when the Ford motor car came along, what was going to happen to all the horses, right? There's always going to be this type of fear factor, not realizing that we could maybe just have more people have transportation, right? And the markets themselves will grow, and that will create its own new employment opportunities. And I think fintech is a great example of that. So we're seeing, whilst we are driving this huge amount of automation in our business, it's also creating a huge amount of employment in terms of data scientists and engineers and AI practitioners. And I'm honestly saying this today, and I hope this is encouraging for folks on the webinar, but we cannot get enough AI practitioners today. There's a supply and demand mismatch in the industry. We would always be in search of more people for our AI teams, especially people with an engineering background who have solved real life problems in an AI domain. So that creates a huge amount of new employment. But I think we also have to believe that a lot of the automation and AI that we're seeing in the workplace is also having very positive impacts on the world of work. So I was speaking to our HR head today, and she was telling me that we are already testing an AI tool in HR that will be able to predict how engaged different employees are. And in a new world of work from home, this is so critical, because it's so hard to know, which of your team is struggling, who is really not, psychologically coping up with this new paradigm. And this tool is able to basically, raise the alarm if the employee becomes much more subdued and low engagement and low contribution. So that's a phenomenally powerful use, I think, that would be very difficult to replicate. And that's not taking away anyone's job, right? There's nobody that would be able to do that without the tool. So I think that's a really good example. Similarly, you're seeing, all sorts of different processes in the workplace being automated by AI models, and means that you can actually do more interesting things, right? So we can launch new products, new experiences more quickly for our customers. It doesn't mean that we, take away from a job that somebody was always doing. I think where it gets really interesting though is in the world of engineering. And I do wonder in 10 years if we will have, traditional coding teams. All this rush to teach our children to code, and every new edtech startup in India is teaching children coding at the age of 6 months now. I wonder if those skills will eventually be redundant, because it's very easy now to create these apprentice AI models that a good engineer can train up to do a lot of the most basic code that they do every day. Again, I don't think that removes necessarily the pool of employees, but it changes what you need to do to be competitive in the workplace now. So you need to keep kind of rising up and aiming higher, because certainly at that lower level, you could see a bot taking your job.
Yeah. In fact, I'm working on an article for our website about the digital workforce. And some people think that the digital workforce literally is a workforce made up of digital bots and apps.
Right.
But clearly what it refers to is a digitally enhanced or enabled
Correct.
human workforce where, as you said, there are jobs that can be better done by machines. And when they're done by machines, that frees up people to do people
more
work.
Interesting stuff. Exactly. And this is such an important point. When we promote and hire, leaders in our company, it's not because of how accurate their code is, right? It's because they inspire, motivate, and lead other people in the business to do good work. So again, only for a very short period of your life will your pure technical skills be the most important thing. Increasingly, everything else about you becomes more important. So there's something wonderful about AI freeing you up from a lot of the day-to-day work and drudgery of your job. I mean, I remember, my first job, I'm guessing for you as well, Stuart, there was a lot of boring stuff. I had to photocopy things, all day long. and that doesn't happen anymore. So I get to do more fun work. And so I think that's just a good example. I know that Microsoft are working on a software that kind of prompts like an auto correct, is this what you meant to code? And that's great, because people could probably finish their work that would take, 8 hours in 2. What's wrong with that? More time for life.
Exactly. So you talked about the mismatch of supply and demand, and so that's one of the things we want to emphasize to our audience is to become part of the supply. What AI and data science related skill sets should someone look to acquire if they want a successful career in a fintech company like yours or in the industry?
Great question.
What skills, jobs are most in demand?
Yeah, and it'll fall broadly into abilities and aptitudes, right? And I would say skim over the aptitudes, especially in any emerging industry like fintech. Your aptitude and your attitude and your kind of willingness to just try new things will end up being probably more important than the specific skill set that you have. But saying that, I would say that there's, especially in AI, there's a lot of people we see, a lot of candidates we see today who I would call AI enthusiasts. So maybe they had a role in like product management or marketing, and then they just did a certification in AI, and now they can kind of run, ML models. That's not realistic. I think it's really important that people still focus on the fundamentals. So the further they can go with very traditional engineering, apprenticeship effectively, even if they start out in, a large company doing something that looks completely boring and unrelated, but get very, very strong, good coding skills in different languages. Brilliant start. And then obviously, the basics like SQL, how to work with data sets, how to build data lakes, data curation. Just get familiar with the basics, right? And any large tech employer will be working on that basis today. I would also say as soon as possible when you can get your hands on real life problems, right? So rather than working in this kind of enthusiast zone, don't go and be like the AI expert in a very traditional business, right? They won't be using your skills. Actually go into a business that is AI first and get your hands dirty. Really get your hands dirty. Get involved in real life projects. Get to know the business inside out so that you can work out where could AI really solve a problem, right? It would have been impossible for a AI guru to look at a business like ours and figure out this face matching phenomenon, right? That's not obvious.
Right.
But once somebody had been, deeply embedded in our fraud and risk team for many years, they could instantly recognize when they saw, an Instagram app, this would help with fraud. So I would say the certifications and the taglines that you use to say that you are AI qualified are much less important than the real life problems you have solved using AI in an organization. So start with the base. It's okay to start in a more traditional engineering role. You move into a company or department where you can solve real problems. And then again, I have to reiterate that attitude is everything, right? Things are moving so quickly. And one of the biggest negatives I've seen in people that we've interviewed, and it's my way or the highway. And I think especially in anything as fast-paced as AI, right? You have to be open-minded and you have to appreciate you will learn. A lot will be happening quickly, and keep up to date. Do webinars, go to conferences, even follow there's some incredible, handle on LinkedIn. Just keep learning, keep educating yourself. So yeah, that would be the sort of broad brush. I would just final point, I would say, if you are at the very early stage of your career and you know that you want to be a real kind of AI expert and you're deciding whether to be a sort of business, economics, or data specialist versus an engineer, I would probably say go down the engineer path and then sideways, because we definitely find it's easier to train an engineer in the data side than the other way around. There we go.
That's an interesting point. I wonder why that is exactly, by the way. It's one of those things where you think, as you mentioned earlier, everybody's trying to teach their children to code. So you would think that somebody with a data science background could pick up the engineering skills, and you're saying it's the other way around.
I guess what I'm saying is coding is going to become like speaking a language, right? It's going to become a base level expected, characteristic. But how quickly you can then kind of jump up and go beyond that depends on your understanding of businesses. So an engineer who's obsessed and fascinated by business is the dream combination. But it's not impossible to go the other way around. And that's also a really important point, which is even the best engineers that we've hired can be stumped when they don't really understand the intricacies of the business. And so, almost a kind of average engineer, real thirst and hunger to understand how our business works is going to be 10 times more valuable than a rock star, superstar coder. Business understanding and just interest and inquiry, I would say, are probably the most important skills once you're in the job, especially in fintech.
Okay. We do have one comment to the chat. Lizzie, could you repeat what you said to do with Twitter and LinkedIn? Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, I just said that, in this day and age, we're so lucky that we can become experts just by following some of the right voices in the world. So I can share afterwards, but some of the Twitter handles that I follow who are just, really interesting people at Google who are working on interesting, problems. I've been following some really interesting people in the autonomous car space. not Elon Musk, he's not very good on Twitter. People who are really, experts. He's a bit, you follow him for something else. But people that are real experts in the domain, and what they will then do is you will get access through them to really interesting blogs, events that you wouldn't have heard of otherwise. So I'd say it's so easy to say that social media is a menace and a distraction, but if you use it smartly and if you follow the right people and block out the noise, it's one of the best ways to keep yourself educated in AI, I would say. Yeah,
I think, Lizzie, what you just said and what your answer to the previous question, I think addresses this next question that I had. So I don't know that we need to go into it in detail, but do you have specific advice that relates to what someone in the fintech industry or financial services industry needs to do to stay relevant?
Yeah, probably the same actually, which is, make sure that you understand both business context and the world of evolving AI and ML, right? And I think especially in banks, that's really tough because the business context and the way it's operating today will be very far removed from what you're reading and hearing about when you begin, going deep into the worlds of AI. So I would say the sooner you can work for a fintech, the better. And every company is becoming a fintech now, so that's very easy, especially in India. But yeah, I'd say don't be scared. A few years ago, working in a bank or a traditional financial services firm was considered a job for life. That was never going to be a bad career move. And I think we will all be shocked by how quickly that changes. I think people will be really surprised by how redundant traditional banks become, in the sense that they're going to go out of business, but just in the scope of what they do, right? Eventually, most banks all over the world will be the storage of capital and the regulatory, interface, but the front end and the customers touch financial products will all be tech driven. So if you're really fascinated by AI and technology, but you want to work in the financial services industry, you may as well just go straight to a tech company or a fintech. I would say you won't necessarily get the baptism in a bank, but and I've worked on all sides, so I'm trying to be balanced.
No, I mean,
yeah.
To echo that, I mean, it's been a long time since I've had to touch my checkbook, which is how the bank wants me to make payments, but I use PayPal every day. So
there you go. And that's just become even more relevant in the last 6 months, right? So, and I think also, specific to India, but we really are accelerating at such a faster pace than any other market has done before in this way when it comes to digital finance. And so you could even see things emerging here that the rest of the world had never dreamt of. So it's even more important to stay ahead of the curve if you're in India and graduating today.
Okay. Looking ahead, if you're going to look 5 years down the road, what would a career in fintech look like for a data science or AI professional?
I hope it looks like, I guess, my career, which is very engaging, extremely engaging. So I would say I can't remember the last time I felt bored in my work, right? I'm constantly stimulated, engaged and learning, engaging, and then impactful, right? Somebody asked me the other day, what really motivates you, right? What really makes you want to do this every morning? And when I really broke it down and kept asking why, it was because I felt I was having a really positive impact on people and an industry. Okay. And at the end of the day, that is what matters. That's going to be your legacy. That's going to be how you sleep at night. Having a positive impact on other people is one of the most beautiful and, powerful things you could have in your career. I think people in the media, I read once that hairdressers are the happiest people, hairdressers, because 10 times a day someone says, "Oh, thank you, I look amazing." So impact is really important, and make sure you're having a positive impact on the world or somebody. And then I guess the third one I'd say is evergreen, meaning don't get sidelined, don't get stuck down a niche that becomes, irrelevant over time. make sure that whatever you're doing, you are constantly learning and constantly, evolving and trying new things. And actually, if you look at, myself or my co-founders and many of the founders and entrepreneurs that are friends of mine, did not have a straight line career. Our careers were quite sideways sometimes, right? So I remember leaving a very cushy, well-paid investment job where I was investing lots of money and staying in 5-star hotels. And I went into a startup, right? Almost in day zero. It was very early stage at that time in London. And it felt like a real, I didn't even have a desk. I used to have to sit on a windowsill and use my laptop. And I thought, what have I done? This is crazy. But that opportunity got me to India and building some incredible businesses in India. So don't be scared to sometimes go sideways. A really interesting career in fintech often will have that. But you can then make big leaps in the future. So I think it's going to be one of the most interesting domains for the next decade. I still think that we're on day zero in fintech. You say PayPal, but PayPal is one of the only mega highly valued fintech companies that has come out, right? Still, all the big banks, JP Morgan's, the Bank of America, these companies are still worth multiples of any fintech company today. And I do not believe that will be the case in a decade, which means over the next 10 years, a huge amount of value creation is going to happen in fintech. And literally millions of jobs will be created in domains and products that we can't even imagine today, because we're going to rewrite the way the industry works. What worked in the past isn't going to work today. And we're a good example at Zest. We are obsessed with the concept of kill the card. We think credit cards are a terrible business model. They were designed for the 1990s. They are not relevant today to young people who use mobile phones. And so we're designing alternative products to credit cards. But that will happen in every single piece of the traditional finance industry. It's impossible to even imagine what it will look like in 5 years or 10 years in fintech, because so much is being built. It's like I imagine the kind of first days of building the railroads in America. We're literally like that. We're just laying down the tracks. There's going to be so much innovation and exciting evolution in the next decade.
Yeah, and one of the things that's interesting about when you're laying down the tracks, you have to send people out in front to scout out the unknown territory.
Yes.
So that makes it even more fascinating.
Risk. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a great point. Actually, that's a really good point. We talk about this a lot at Zest as well, which is, get rid of that fear of failure, because anything fantastic did not come from a space of fear, right? And if you look at the amount of near misses that Google have had, I think they've had, 10 times more products that didn't work compared to the ones that have worked. But that's why they're so fantastic today. So especially in fintech. And it's tough because a lot of people from a traditional finance background are scared of failure because it sometimes has, regulatory penalties and things like that. But for us to truly build those tracks, we need to fail as well and be comfortable with that.
Hopefully we've, in this discussion, inspired some people to consider fintech as a career choice. So I'm going to open this poll and ask people why they would want to pursue a career in fintech. I think there are some strong reasons there, and I think you can pick more than one in this poll. I'll leave this open for a minute or two.
Nice.
Yeah. It's certainly a place to be impactful in people's lives. We talked about how you view Zest Money as having the potential to impact 300 million people's lives.
Yep, absolutely. That's what keeps us going.
Yeah. And certainly a great place for people who like to solve challenging problems.
Exactly.
I would never, for example, never would have made the connection between an Instagram app and a fintech business in the way that you did. So, all right, I'm going to close the poll in about 20 seconds here.
Mm.
You have about 10 seconds to get your answers in. Results are kind of interesting here.
Oh yeah. Ooh, completely split.
Yeah, it's you'd think that people might look at that and say, it's a kind of a cool industry. I see Square and
Yeah.
here in the U.S. is Square and PayPal and a bunch of other high profile unicorn companies, but that's not what's motivating our audience. Our audience are looking at those things like
It's great.
impact and problem solving. So
I have to say that's very millennial. I love this. It's very classic millennial. But brilliant to see.
Very good. So at this point, I think we can move on to our question and answer period. And what I'm going to do is we've been collecting the questions, and I'm going to go through a few of them. One of them is from, let's see. We have a question from Sumedh from our YouTube channel who asks, I'd like to open a fintech startup. What guidance would you give?
Oh, wow. That's great. Do it. I think, there's so much that needs to be built that whatever your idea is, I'm sure there's going to be a space for it. But do your research. I think fintech is one where you can't really kind of be an amateur, I guess. I don't mean that in a patronizing way, but the amount of domain knowledge that you need, even just to get investors to trust you, and then the amount of understanding of regulation that you need will determine your success. So I would say I want everybody here today to want to run a fintech company, but I would also caution that you definitely need to do a lot of homework, and definitely don't jump into something just because it's a wide open space. You may discover there's a good reason for that, i.e. a huge, regulatory risk or something like that. But no, otherwise I'd say go ahead and let me know if I can invest or help.
We have a question from Fanindra who asks, what are some of the unconventional features or data points you considered when you build the model that predicts credit risk or personal default risk?
Yeah, I'm always a bit boring on this topic because I've heard other lending companies say, we think that people with dogs or people, pets are predictive of credit risk. Honestly, none of that's true. Unfortunately, we have found pretty obvious things, but let me give you a couple of examples. A very obvious one is how long do you spend shopping before you take out a loan, right? So if you shop around, if you even come back a few times over a few days, if you compare prices, you tend to be first of all, less likely to be a fraudster, right? So that's a good thing. But you tend to be a better risk. And linked to that, we do have one data point, which is, did you read the terms and conditions fully, right? I don't know how many of you have, there's a new app update and you just like, yeah, click. I've read it, but you haven't. When you're taking out a financial product, especially one that involves, lending, repayments, you must read the terms and conditions. I think we all know that because you need to know what you're paying, what could be the risks. And so customers who don't, not surprisingly, are found to be riskier characters. So those are like really boring examples. I'm not going to pretend that we look at your Facebook feed and see how many friends you have because we don't. It's not predictive. I'm sorry, it's not.
Okay. Charu asks, what technology tools do you use for AI at Zest Money?
Yeah, everything, a lot. I mean, it depends, right? Because we have about 40 engineers working on different AI solutions. So, again, it's back to this point, right? We don't just have an AI bubble. We have an AI application across everything that we do. So whether it's, a front end marketing app that will have an element of AI in it, all the way down to our core risk engines, which will be extremely complex model systems. There's a lot of Python on the back end. I think we mentioned that already. So Python is a very important code for anybody in AI. And then obviously a lot of, cloud-based data systems, but I don't want to give any preferential branding names to any software organizations, but yeah, you can imagine.
We have an interesting question from Sunny, who asks, which do you feel is more important, understanding a business problem or solving it?
Oh, I love that. Oh, and that's quite a hot debate in the world of product management. We debate this a lot internally, meaning the business person or the sort of owner of that problem should ideally lay out the problem so articulately that an engineer can solve it. You shouldn't have a situation where business owners problems and their own solutions and then telling engineers what to build. And we've worked really hard to create the opposite, right? To create a system where the business people are there to articulate problems, but the engineers and the AI team are there to solve them. So I guess the hard answer is for you folk, for the AI team, it's important to be able to do both, right? For the business people, it's more important to be able to articulate the problem. But yeah, I think you need experience on both sides. That's a great question. It's quite philosophical. I might have to sleep on that.
I had a webinar with a decision scientist at Salesforce who pointed out that the business team comes with problems they want the technical people to solve. The technical team comes with solutions.
Looking for a problem.
That are looking for this problem. And that in their view, it's critical to make sure that is a two-way communication, because sometimes not knowing that a solution is possible limits your thinking about the problem.
That's a really good point. I think there's entire businesses that VCs fund that I would define as a problem looking for a solution. So, and that's always really disappointing in the long run. So it's probably better in hindsight then to know your problems as much as your solutions.
I think we have a number of questions that have to do with moving into AI from either engineering or from financial background or from outside either of those. So what steps would you advise somebody to take to move into that?
Again, I guess I would say go and get your hands dirty as quickly as possible. Apply like mad to every open-minded about the type of people that we hire, right? So we again, as I said, we look more for aptitudes rather than skills only. So I wouldn't say be put off, but if you can, doing an internship, even like for a few months inside a company is not a bad idea, because it gives you time to also understand their culture and if it's the right fit for you. The other thing I'd say is people are everything, right? So who you work for can sometimes be as important as the problem you're solving. So back to my Twitter point, maybe do some stalking of the industry you're interested in. Find some of the leading experts, right? So I would say, there's a couple of people at Zest that are absolutely top of their game in what they do. One lady called Natalia, I think she's probably one of a handful of people in the world who can build these underwriting scorecards in an ML format. You should, if you're interested in that vertical, you should be following her and, you know, hounding her and sending her interesting articles and da 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 da. And she might just see something really exciting in that and say, come in and let's, you know, work on a project together. So try and identify people that could help you make that transition, not just the company.
Somebody, Naman asks, is the commercial lending space in fintech already crowded?
Good question. No, great opportunity. I would say a lot of the fintech focus, especially in India in the last few years, has been almost completely on the consumer. There have been some SME and micro SME fintechs that have done really well, but anything bigger than that and anything on, say, like factoring or the more traditional side of commercial lending, very little innovation right now. That's still the domain of the big banks, certainly in India. So place. And I think that is so timely because that's exactly the type of domain where it was assumed you could get by without automation. And COVID has proven that you really let down your clients, right, at that time. So I think you will find that banks will be trying to automate their commercial side of their business very quickly right now. So huge opportunity. Would strongly recommend that. Yeah.
Okay. I think we have reached the end of our hour. So
Oh, no.
I want to apologize to everyone who submitted questions that we could not get to. And there are quite a few, but
Great questions.
Yeah,
thank you.
We really want to thank you, Lizzie, for
thank you.
taking those. And thank you for being with us today. This has been a really wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
I'm going to go back and show a couple of finishing slides, but I did want to let people know how they might be able to get in touch with you on LinkedIn, or are there other social channels
Absolutely.
that be. So there's your LinkedIn information. Are there other Twitter?
Twitter. Yeah. Follow me on Twitter. I think it's at Chapman Lizzie. Just search for Lizzie Chapman on Twitter. I think you'll find me. Yeah, definitely. And I'll try and share more interesting stuff. No.
Well, this has been a wonderful converation and very enjoyable.
Thank you so much.
So
thank you for having me. Really enjoyed it.
I do want to show a brief announcement of a program that we have at Simplilearn called Skill Up. And Skill Up is a way to access a number of our basic courses for free. Over 300 skills and over 1,000 hours of video content. And so these are different from our traditional courses in that these don't include the virtual classroom component, but they do allow you to get a basic understanding of the different topics, and that includes data science and AI, as well as many more. So you can see that. I think I posted the link, and I will again post the link in the chat. But it's Skill Up free online courses at simplilearn.com. And our next webinar will be 1 week from today. It will also involve AI, and it's a job search in the world of AI, recruitment secrets and resume tips revealed for 2021, which is something about how you can try to align your resume with what the AI engines are looking to highlight. So Nikun Verma of Cut Short will be our guest then. And you can connect with Simplilearn on our social channels, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We want to thank everybody for being here today. And we hope that you have enjoyed it and learned from it as much as I have. Again, thank you to Lizzie. And this concludes the webinar.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.